All right, welcome and good evening. So we are continuing to talk about what happened at Sinai. And last week we started to talk about the 10 Commandments. We had previously spoken for a number of weeks just about the events themselves, the revelation. And we started the 10 Commandments last week and we learned about number 1. So today we're going to logically go to number 6. Okay, it's not random. If you were following last week, there's logic to that, why we go from 1 to 6, because 1 is related to 6. Now, number 6 is the prohibition, thou shalt not murder, which would seemingly possibly be the most obvious of all the commandments, perhaps most unnecessary to tell us, not to murder, but I mean, as we've spoken about, there's a buildup there's a structure to the 10 Commandments, and hopefully we'll also just gain a better appreciation for this. Not so much, thank God, that any of us need to be told this, but that there's more to it than meets the eye, perhaps we'll say. Now, the most obvious perspective is just from the societal perspective. A society where murder is rampant will not function properly, and it will be detrimental to that society. And therefore, every society has these kinds of rules in place that don't allow for murder, except for some have exceptions for certain people and certain types of people that they're not interested in keeping around, and then they all of a sudden allow it. So it's not obvious within every society. Unfortunately, there have been many societies, and as Jews we know this for sure, that have condoned murder, as long as it was to a people or to the lower class, or to certain types of, to Jews or whoever it was. So it's not so obvious to everyone. And that comes from a perspective of the only reason not to murder is because we need our society to function. But if our society can function without certain people, then let it function without them. And if somebody is of no use to society, then we will just remove them from society. Sorry, I'm just gonna mute everyone. So it's not so simple, and unfortunately, we've seen that. It's interesting. In ancient Rome, they built a large stadium, the Roman Colosseum, and for entertainment, instead of watching football or basketball, they would watch fights to the death, gladiator fights, which were literally murder, fights to the death. Or sometimes if they for entertainment again, they would release wild animals, and if you were strong enough to hunt the animals, then you hunted the animals. If you weren't strong enough, then the animals hunted you. And the Colosseum was a work of architectural genius. It's the original stadium, really. And if you could imagine that 2,000 years ago, they could build such a thing that seated 50 to 80,000 spectators. And this is what they would do. They would come and watch basically carnage and murder and terrible violence, which is still what entertains people today. But thankfully, often it's short of certain types of martial arts. But usually the entertainment is fake and it's in the movies. But there was real in those days, and there wasn't really an appreciation for the value of those people's lives more than just to provide other people with entertainment. And what's fascinating is that at the same time, Rome is the height of society, of advanced progressive society of those days. And at the same time, in a small Roman colony called Israel, there's the recording of the Mishnah going on. And in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, they're writing the following. They're writing, and I'll bring it up on the screen. How do I do this? At the very same time, they're writing he used to say, this is a quote of Rabbi Akiva, the great sage Rabbi Akiva, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God. Especially beloved is he, for it was made known to him that he had been created in the image of God. As it is said, from the image of God, he made man." So at the same time that the height of society, Roman society, is basically seemingly fails to see the value of human life. In Israel, they're teaching that man is beloved to God. He's created in the image of God, and it's a totally different perspective. And that's really been throughout history, really, all the way back to Abraham, is that the Jews, we go against the grain. We don't just go with the flow, whatever society is doing. We just go along with it. No, Abraham was the first to really stand up and go against society. Actually, he's called Avraham HaIvri, the Hebrew. But the sages tell us that part of that name is that Ivri also comes from the idea of Aver la Yarden, or it means the other side of the Jordan, or basically the idea of being on the other side, and that the whole world was on one side, was idolaters, and including all sorts of again, like violent forms of idolatry. And on the other side was Abraham standing on the other side. And that's always how it's been, is we don't just go along with whatever's happening in society, but we have our own values which supersede those of society. So at the same time, we have this teaching, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God." Now the sages in this Mishnah quote a verse, and the verse is, "For in the image of God, he made man," which basically sums up what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that man is created in the image of God. We'll have to talk about what that means, and that's going to be a main topic tonight. But before we do that, we can pose a question, which is, if you look at this verse, Genesis 9:6, chapter 9, verse 6. So it's interesting because below I listed for you 3 verses that mention that man is created in the image of God. The first is at the creation of man. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." That's in Bereshit, Genesis 1:26. And then it's God created, the very next verse, God created man in God's image. He created him in his image. In God's image he created him. Genesis, Bereshit 1:27. So, and then we have our verse that's quoted in the Mishnah, which doesn't show up till chapter 9, verse 6. So why is the author of this Mishnah choosing the verse that only appears in chapter 9, when all the way back in chapter 1, we already have the mention of the idea that man is created in the image of God? So one of the commentaries to the Mishnah, Rabbi Shmuel de Uzida, he was a 16th century student of the great Kabbalist, the Arizal, though much of it, he's not necessarily a writer of Kabbalah. It could be he writes about Kabbalah also, but this is not Kabbalah. He gives a very simple answer, and he says that indeed, to prove the first point of the Mishnah, it would have been good enough to bring one of those verses. The first point is, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God." If you just want to show that man was created in the image of God, any of those 2 verses would do the trick. "Let us make man in our image," God created man in his image. That would really suffice. But in order to bring out the second point, which is especially beloved is he, that we are especially beloved, and the reason it gives is for it was made known to him that he had been created in the image of God. So in order to bring out that point that we are especially beloved, that you see in this verse. Because what does this verse say? If you take the whole verse, the Mishnah doesn't quote the whole thing, but if you take the whole verse, it says, here it actually talks about the prohibition of murder. It's the first, I think it could be it mentions it before. I'm not sure if it's the first time, but here it mentions the prohibition of murder way before the SINAI Revelation, way before the 10 Commandments. This is actually a verse that God is talking to Noah, after he comes out of the ark, God says, whoever sheds the blood of man, through man shall his blood be shed. In other words, the punishment for murder is capital punishment. Why? For in the image of God he made man. For man was created in the image of God. So right here, the Torah connects the idea of not to murder, the prohibition of murder, to the idea of the fact that man was created in the image of God. It doesn't just connect it, it says that that's the reason why the punishment is capital punishment, which is a way of expressing how severe this act really is. It could have been that if somebody did this, if somebody murdered someone, their punishment should be to pay a large fine or something else, right? Lashes, whatever, could have been something else. But the Torah lists a very severe punishment, capital punishment. And what that shows us is that how beloved each person is, how beloved that person was that was taken from the world, and it brings out the second idea of the Mishnah. Especially beloved is he, for it was made known to him that he's creating the image and of God. And in what way, where do we see this brought out, that we are especially beloved? In this verse, where it teaches us how severe it is, how serious it is to take a life, for that life is created in the image of God. And we see from that just how beloved each individual is before God. Now, to build on that idea, let's go back to our chart. We're going to go this way, of the 10 Commandments. And we're really just looking at number 6 today. But as we've mentioned, there's patterns in the 10 Commandments. And one of the patterns that we've been mentioning is the pattern that goes across, that number 1 relates to number 6, number 2 relates to number 7, etc. And number 1 is the commandment, I am the Lord your God, the commandment to believe in God. And this number 6 is, you shall not murder. So what is the relationship between these two commandments? So the sages of the Midrash already spoke about this 1,500 years ago or so. And we'll read it together because I put it in this time. And they write as follows. They write for each of them, but we're just going to focus on the first numbers 1 and 6 today. They say, how are the 10 Commandments given? 5 on one tablet and 5 on the other tablet. And that's what I showed in the chart. 5 on one side, 5 on the other side. It says, I am the Lord your God. And corresponding to that, across from number 1 is number 6 is do not murder. You shall not murder. This teaches that one who spills another's blood, it is as if he has diminished the image of the king, the image of God. Meaning, that's the connection. The connection between 1 and 6 is number 1 is, I am the Lord your God. Do not deny God's existence. And number 6 is, don't remove a person from the earth. Don't eliminate someone from the earth. Don't murder. That person is somehow, in some sense, in the image of God. And we are diminishing that image by removing someone else from the earth. And the Midrash goes on and says, this can be compared to a king of flesh and blood who conquers a country, and they erect statues of him, make figurines and mint coins with his appearance. So you have a king, his face is all over the place. They put up statues and they make figurines. There's coins with his face. And after some time, they tip over the statues, smash the figurines, and rub out the coins, diminishing the king's appearance. So too, for one who spills blood, the Torah considers it as if he diminished the image of the king. As the verse states, whoever sheds the blood of man, that's our verse that we just read, through man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So when a person kills another person, they're not just, it's not only, it's also obviously very serious that they're taking that life, but on a deeper level, they're also diminishing God's image. They are removing someone from the earth who is created in the image of God. And what we need to talk about is, what does that mean, and why does that make it so significant? What is so special about that, to be created in the image of God, that it makes it so severe that that person has been taken from the earth? Well, again, the obvious parts of murder in terms of the impact on society, the pain it inflicts on others, are certainly there. But those are the types of things that they don't speak to the intrinsic value of a human life. They're sort of outside. They're how does it affect others, or who does it cause pain to? And they're important, but they don't speak to the intrinsic value of life. And that's a central Jewish value. And it stems from this point, that each and every person is created in the image of God. And what we're going to talk about is how that idea really contributes tremendous value to each life. And we have to see in what way, what we mean by that. In what way do we see that tremendous value in each life as a result of being created in the image of God? So it's a very difficult term to really try to explain. Like, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? God doesn't actually have an image. God is not physical. And if we try to attribute an image to God, then that is heresy. So what do we mean? I think when I've asked this question in classes previously, I've said, does that mean to be created in the image of God? Does that mean we have like long blonde hair and huge muscles like Hercules? Like, is that what it means to be in the image of God? Certainly not. That's not what it means. So what does it mean? So there's numerous explanations within our commentaries, within our sages, but we're going to focus on two primarily on two. And the first is that some say that the idea of being in the image of God is that God has endowed us with free will. No other creature has free will. Certainly animals don't have free will. They act on instinct. They cannot overcome their instinct. They don't have that ability. Even angels, we're taught, don't have free will. They always obey God's instructions to them. That's actually the Hebrew word for an angel is a malach. A malach is a messenger, basically, and they will follow whatever they're told. But as human beings, we are endowed, we are given free will. The only, God has free will to do as he wants, and he gives us that ability. And really our entire humanity rests in that, and our entire purpose in this world, according to many, lies within our free will. As we've spoken about before, one of the most basic questions everybody has to ask themselves at some point in their life is, why are we here? Why is there a world, and why did God create the world? So there's different approaches to this, but one of the most well-known and relatable is the idea that God created the world to bestow goodness on another creature. God wanted to share, God wanted to give of his goodness. The ultimate goodness one can get is actually to experience God and to have a relationship with God. But also, in order for that relationship and that connection to be the most pleasurable, it has to be earned. Something that is given to someone for free is not as enjoyable as something that is earned. And so if this is going to be the ultimate pleasure, the ultimate reward, if God wants to give us, this is God after all, so he wants to give us the highest level of pleasure. So the highest level of pleasure is not a free pleasure, it's an earned pleasure. And so God creates an arena for us. It's called the world. And in the world, we have challenges. And in the world, we have tests. And in the world, not everything is always so clear to us. And it's not always clear what to do and how to act. And that's the ultimate challenge of life, and it's only there. It's only a test because we have free will. For an angel without free will, they will always do the right thing. They won't earn a reward. But for mankind, we are challenged to do our best and to perfect ourselves and to be constantly improving ourselves, to make ourselves more similar to God. Because the more similar that we are, the more godly qualities that we can acquire, then the closer we can come to God, the closer we can have a relationship with him and enjoy the ultimate level of pleasure in this world and the next world, especially as our souls move on. So that's what it's about, according to many. And if that's the case, then that's only because of our free will. It's only because we're created in the image of God. And when somebody takes someone's life and short circuits it and ends it prematurely, so they've really taken away that person's ability to develop their soul and perfect their soul. Their soul might have to come back for another round to finish the job. But that is the ultimate offense against this idea of being in the image of God. The image of God, as we're explaining it now, is that we're giving free will. That is the source of our test in this world and the source of our ability to complete our purpose and our mission. And by taking someone's life, someone ends that prematurely. But what we have here is intrinsic value here. We have this intrinsic idea that life is intrinsically valuable, in that a person is fulfilling, right, when they're put in the world and they're developing themselves and they're improving themselves and they are perfecting their character and they're fulfilling mitzvot and they're coming close to God, then they are fulfilling the purpose of creation. That's what God wants from creation. And every person has the ability to do that on their own. I don't mean that they only do it on their own, but I mean that is intrinsic value to each life. And so whether someone has utility to greater society or not, but they have utility to themselves in fulfilling this, in realizing their ultimate purpose and developing. So taking that is just this ultimate level of sin. For man is created in the image of God. Man has free choice. Man each person has their own mission, so to speak, in bringing themselves close to God. That is on the personal level. Now, there's also a global level that we can look at it, and that's based on another interpretation of being created in the image of God, which actually gets a little bit, what we just talked about is touching on a little bit of Kabbalah, but not so much. The next idea is getting a little bit more Kabbalistic, but I think it's really 101. It's important for every Jew to know the following, this other interpretation of being created in the image of God. And this is taught by Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin in his great work, Nefesh HaChaim. And he first of all explains, we have it on the slides, I don't know if we'll read everything, but he explains that the word in Hebrew, Tselem Elokim, which is the image of God, he says, first of all, it doesn't mean that we're exactly like God. It just means that in some sense we are similar. And that's going to be the question. Even in the last interpretation we gave, it means we're similar in a sense. In what sense? That we have free will. He has a much more profound idea. And he asked the question, he says, to understand, this is the second paragraph, to understand the idea of Tselem Elokim, of being in the image of God, the image of Elokim, we have to ask why it's specifically stated in the image of God, Elokim. See, God has different names, right? So when we make a blessing, we say, Baruch Atah Ad Hashem, Elokeinu, and we use that name Elokeinu, which is the name Elokim. And he said, and Elokim has a certain meaning, and other names of God that we use also have certain meanings. What is the name Elokim?